Now, I am Abosodi Adeniwa. We'll begin in the Middle East, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is on the verge of a dramatic expansion of peace deals across the Middle East. Speaking on Thursday, Prime Minister Netanyahu claimed victory over Iran and hinted at a bigger regional plan reportedly worked out with former U.S. President Donald Trump. The plan ends the war in Gaza within 2 weeks, get Hamas out, and have Arab countries like the UAE and Egypt help govern Gaza. In return, more Arab states, including Saudi Arabia and maybe even Syria, would normalize ties with Israel under an expanded Abraham Accords. But there's a catch. Prime Minister Netanyahu continues to reject any role for the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, which Arab leaders say is a deal breaker. And Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has a different opinion on how the conflict played out. Mr. Khamenei is speaking out for the first time since the ceasefire with Israel, and he's calling the war a win for Iran. At 86 years old, Mr. Khamenei appeared defiant, saying Iran will never surrender to the U.S. He brushed off American claims that recent airstrikes wiped out key nuclear sites, calling them exaggerated, and insisted Iran's nuclear program is still standing. He also praised Iran's military for hitting back, including that missile strike on a U.S. base in Qatar, although no casualties were reported. But inside Iran, there is tension. People are returning to cities like Tehran, but many fear this was just the first round, and they are questioning whether the country is really ready for more. Meanwhile, the death toll tells its own story. More than 600 Iranian civilians killed and nearly 30 dead in Israel. A state funeral for top commanders is planned in Tehran as both sides now claim victory. But the ceasefire feels anything but certain. Now, tensions in Iran have reached the boiling point following its recent conflict with Israel. Iranian authorities are now launching a sweeping crackdown, and it's marked by arrests, executions, and growing concern from human rights groups. Let's bring you a report.
Iran's government is in the grip of what officials are calling a counterintelligence emergency. In the wake of a 12-day war with Israel, authorities have executed at least 6 persons and detained hundreds more, accused of working with Israeli spy networks. The crackdown follows a series of targeted assassinations during the conflict. High-profile figures, including senior commanders in Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard and nuclear scientists, all killed in operations Tehran blames on Israel's Mossad. Iranian officials say the strikes were possible only due to an unprecedented breach of its intelligence services, now believed to have been infiltrated by Israeli agents. The government has responded with mass arrests. Over 700 persons have reportedly been detained in less than 2 weeks. State media has heard what it claims to be confessions from suspects, but right groups warn they were likely obtained under duress. Analysts say this is part of a wider strategy of silencing dissent, intimidating the press, and stamping out any sign of unrest. The government has also tightened digital control. Internet access was severely cut during the war and remains patchy. Major social platforms remain blocked, reinforcing what critics say is an effort to isolate citizens from the outside world. There are growing fears Iran is entering a new era of repression, reminiscent of the late 1980s, when thousands of political prisoners were executed behind closed doors and buried in unmarked graves.
As it stands, human rights groups are calling for international scrutiny, and they are demanding that Iran halt what they call politically motivated executions. With tensions still simmering, observers warn the worst may not yet be over. Global affairs analyst Catch Ononuju joins me live via Zoom from Abuja. Good to have you join us, Mr. Ononuju. In Iran is a season of sweeping crackdown marked by arrests and executions. What do you make of events in Iran in the face of its conflict with Israel, and if you may add, the USA?
Well, you would say that this was a long time in coming. Iran saw this coming. Iran prepared for this for 40 years. So, whatever failings it thinks it has had in terms of Israeli ability to penetrate its security network and to be able to unleash the internal, blows it gave to Iran because it did infiltrate its security apparatus. That's it's one part of it. But then, of course, you've had what the Ayatollah is saying that they won. They won is that they didn't suffer as much as they did. They had ample time, so they could have moved the nuclear assets to somewhere else. And that's what everybody's saying. You can see now the analysis in the United States is getting President Trump very angry. But then the world has to take an honest appraisal of these things so that we would know what will happen next. What this means is that the bombings would not stop. The crisis between Iran and Israel would not stop, since Israel would now believe it has not achieved its main objectives. And those objectives will be very, very difficult to achieve. And I don't think you can achieve them if you're not willing to put boots on the ground. So if you're not going to put boots on the ground to conquer the land, you will not be able to surgically rearrange society in the way you think. They've been talking about things like a regime change. So yes, that's why the Iranians think that the Israelis didn't achieve regime change and that a lot of their nuclear assets properly enriched were removed. And some people are suspecting to Pakistan. But then we don't know which is real. So in this kind of strike, you can strike anything. But as far as you do not get to nuclear assets, Iran now says it did win the battle. But then I still believe what we need is negotiations in that region between Israel, United States, and Iran. Iran has gone very far, and that I blame on President Trump's first initial unilateral pull out from the inspections. Today, no inspections occur in Iran, so nobody actually knows what's going on. The IAEA cannot tell you anything since, due to the unilateral withdrawal by the United States in Trump's first term, Iran continued its work at the nuclear facility, and nobody actually can tell what happened. So throwing bombs without, a background recheck of what actually happened is not going to get this thing come to an end. It will infuriate Israel as they are currently infuriated. And of course, make America start thinking, do I really need to do this again? No. Find a way to gain negotiations between the Persians, the Israelis, and the Arabs in that region.
All right, Mr. Ononuju, as it stands now, there's tension in Iran. People are unsure what to expect next. And as a matter of fact, human rights groups are outraged and they are calling for international scrutiny about happenings in Iran. How much attention do you suppose their voices would get in the face of multiple global issues seeking attention?
It's a very, very important voice because Iran may, in its reaction to the very devastating penetration of its security network, start to unleash what people may think are simply strategies and protocols to silence the historical opposition in its political system, and that's what we must be very careful about, because in Iran, Jews are easy and freer and better treated than in most of Europe. And I do not think people should be now victimized. So I believe that call for a check on Iran so that it does not overreach itself in its efforts to actually calm down on those it says it must clamp down on, and that's mostly those it says cooperated with the state of Israel for Israel to have achieved this very, very effective penetration of Iran's security apparatus.
But based on precedents, how effective have global voices been in stemming the tide and calming tensions in troubled regions, just like we're having in Iran at the moment?
Well, you should also know, no matter what region it is, the world has always found go-between people, even if as difficult as North Korea, the world does have go-between people that they could reach such people. If it's Iran, I don't see anything difficult. The talks are watching. So there are quite a lot of people who can play the go-between. No region is actually that difficult, unless if you do not want to do it, just like the one you see right now in the issue of Iran and Israel. This particular crisis started after the Islamic Revolution, because historically, Iran and Israel had been neighbors through generations. So it's actually after the Islamic Revolution that the mullahs were now preaching that they would not allow Israel to exist. The Israelis who came now were Ashkenazis who converted to Judaism, that the original people who left that region were black people. These are not black people. So the idea of the returning Ashkenazis Jew has to be white, for me, is an ideological, pursuit that also goes with the Western world's attempt to make, if the Jews who come back as Ashkenazis are whites, then maybe Jesus is justified to be white. So those things are now going away. So if you're talking about returning of the Jews back to the homeland, what about the African Jews? A lot of them scattered everywhere, from Uganda to Nigeria, through Cameroon to Ghana to Ethiopia. And if you're not going to make Jewry a consequence of color, then that would defeat that particular issue that has brought problem in that particular region. So I suggest a negotiation between the patients, the Israelis, and the Americans for us to find lasting peace in the Middle East.
Let's talk about the current ceasefire that's in place. How sustainable do you think it is? And how close are we to having lasting peace in the Middle East?
We will have lasting peace if we can convince Israel that violence is not what we will have to rely on to make the current experiment with the state of Israel a success. For Israel to think it has to fight Libya, bomb Syria, meddle in Lebanon, put out Iraq, and then put out Iran for it to be able to survive, I think that is preposterous. We need to find a better way to assure that the current experiment with the creation of the State of Israel can actually be sustainable. But if you're going to tell me to be sustainable like the dollar, which was sustained with violence, I will tell you we're now moving into a multipolar world where the BRIC nations seems to have far more trade amongst themselves than even the dollar-denominated zone. So nothing lasts forever, in global arrangements, and things are bound to change. So the idea of this current experiment of Israel is only feasible by the annihilations with the violence of its neighbors, in this case, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Libya, and now Iran. I think that is a very false premise. We need to work harder to find a better way to reassure Israel that this current experiment of stating a new state of Israel is feasible. Violence is not going to work.
Global affairs analyst Catch Anonaju. It's a pleasure talking to you on World Now. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.